So our anthropoids that first started evolving around 50 million years ago, today we split these into two groups, the platyrrhines and the catarrhines. And the easiest way to remember these two groups is that the platyrrhines are the New World monkeys. And when we talk about the New World, we're referring to North and South America. The catarrhines are the Old World monkeys and apes, and humans. Now the names platyrrhine and catarrhine mean flat-nosed or sharp-nosed. So not only do we see a geographic difference between these, but also there are some physical characteristics that unite them. The platyrrhines are this divergent group here, the New World monkeys, and then the catarrhines are going to be everything else here on our cladogram. Platyrrhines first arrived in the New World, we think, from Africa around 35 million years ago. But if we look at this map here, by 35 million years ago, the continents are pretty much in the same place that they're in today. So how was it possible that these monkeys made it from Africa here all the way over to South America? It's not really clear. And sometimes our best guess is this surfboarding monkey. But somehow, one of these early New World monkey ancestors made it across the Atlantic Ocean, and then from there spread out and diversified throughout South America and into Central America. Today, we still see these monkeys living in South America and Central America, and while we say that they're New World monkeys, and so technically we could mean North America, there have never been these monkeys living up here in North America, certainly not where we are. The climate just isn't right for supporting this type of species. So we see these platyrrhines restricted just to the more tropical regions of the two continents. There are many different types of New World monkeys. Again, dozens and dozens of species. Things like capuchins, spider monkeys, howler monkeys, marmosets, absolutely any kind of monkey you can imagine. They live in Central and South America. Now, all of the New World monkeys are diurnal, except for one. Diurnal meaning they're active during the daytime. The one monkey that's active at nighttime is, not surprisingly, called the night monkey. But for the most part, you'll be able to see all of these monkeys during the day. And they also have prehensile tails, meaning that their long tails have evolved in a very special way to have a lot of flexibility, but also a lot of gripping power. And there's actually some specialized skin on the undersides of these tails that they can use essentially as a third arm, or a fifth arm might be a better way to say it. So this prehensile tail can be used for stabilization, it can be used to grasp things, but it comes in very useful for these little guys as they're hopping around this rainforested environment. So our next group then are the catarrhines. And again, the catarrhines make up the Old World monkeys and the apes, including humans. Old World monkeys are also called CERCOPITHECOIDS, and they live in Africa and in Asia and a little bit in Europe, but not very much. There's an incredibly wide variety of Old World monkeys, and there are things like baboons or colobus monkeys or macaques. Some live in trees and some live on the ground, and this has inspired what primatologists refer to as the splat effect. And so you see that with Old World monkeys, that the larger ones, like the baboons here, which can get very, very big, the large monkeys tend to live on the ground, while the smaller monkeys, like the colobus monkeys, live in the trees. And this is because if you are a tiny monkey, not only can taller tree branches support you, but if you happen to fall, there's a much greater likelihood that you'll be able to survive any type of fall. But if you're a big monkey like a baboon, living in the trees is a really bad idea. Not only can those tree branches give way under your weight, but if you do fall, there's likely to be a lot more damage or a bigger splat. So big monkeys like this tend to live on the ground. The Hamadryas baboons actually live in sort of an open grassland area, very similar to what our early ancestors would have been living in. So Hamadryas baboons and other baboon species are often the subject of anthropological research because they really are sharing the same environment that a lot of our earliest ancestors had. The next group of primates that we have are the apes, and we've already talked about the apes a little bit, but I'm going to quickly run through each of these 6 different groups of apes. Another word for apes are the hominoids, and don't confuse hominoids with hominids or hominins. I know these words are all very similar. It's because of the scientific naming process that you have to follow these certain rules about how groups should be named, and so it all gets very confusing. So we can call them our apes, and that's fine. Apes today live in Africa and Asia, and we break them into two groups, the lesser apes and the great apes. Lesser apes include the gibbons and the siamangs, and the great apes include the orangutans, gorillas, chimps, and humans. These apes first started evolving probably around 25 million years ago, either in Africa or in Asia or both. And there are many types of apes that have come before that are no longer alive. This is one of them. This is a group called proconsul, and they're from East Africa. And they lived for almost 10 million years in East Africa. Now, just to put this in perspective, we don't see these guys around today, so we have a tendency perhaps to think of them as a group of animals who have somehow failed evolutionarily. But they were living in East Africa for almost 10 million years. We've only been around as a species for 200,000. Okay, so they've been around for 16 times as long, or they were around for 16 times as long as our species has been here. In that sort of scale, they were a very, very successful group of apes, and the jury's still out on us. We see that these proconsul apes are very sexually dimorphic, which means that males tend to be very large and females tend to be very small. They mostly ate fruit and leaves, and we can tell this by looking at their teeth. Their teeth look very similar to the teeth of apes that we see today. So we can learn a lot about proconsul by comparing their fossils to living apes like chimpanzees and gorillas. Another cool old world ape, or hominid, is this species Paralipithecus catalunicus, which is a species that was found in southern Spain. It's about 13 million years old, and based on its bones, we can see that it was arboreal, meaning it lived in trees, and it was also a knuckle walker. And this is a very interesting trait because it's the way that gorillas and chimpanzees and orangutans get around, by actually walking on the backs of some of their fingers. It's a very special way of locomoting through an area. And so the fact that we see this guy knuckle walking 13 million years ago probably suggests something about the timing of that particular adaptation in the ape lineage. Now, the next hominoid is one of my favorites. This is a very, very cool group of apes called Gigantopithecus. Gigantopithecus is an East Asian ape, so living in the area of China. And Gigantopithecus first emerged around 7 million years ago, or some people say as early as 9 million years ago. And they lived in East Asia until maybe, 500,000 years ago. Some people say only 100,000 years ago. So they were, again, a very successful group of animals over a very long time. They're also the world's largest primate, or the largest primate that's ever existed. And they're not around today. We can't find them anymore. But just for some perspective, here is a human skull. So just random human, could be you, could be me, could be any one of us. Next to this human skull is a gorilla skull. And you can see how much bigger the gorilla is than a modern human today. This is Gigantopithecus. He is absolutely massive. Massive. And while we don't know exactly how tall he was, some anthropologists have estimated that Gigantopithecus was between 6 and 9 or 10 feet tall. So sort of a Bigfoot-looking guy. We don't really have any reason to think that this is the sort of the origin for any sort of Bigfoot stories, but it certainly seems to fit that niche in our imagination anyway. So, unfortunately not alive anymore, but a very successful group of super, super large primates in Asia. Alright, so now let's talk about some of the primates that are alive today. First, we're going to start off with our gibbons and our siamangs. These are our lesser apes. They first evolved around 16 to 14 million years ago over there in Asia. The gibbons today live only in Southeast Asia. They're not very big, which is why we call them the lesser apes. They're only about 1 meter tall, so 3 feet high, between 10 and 25 pounds. They have this mode of swinging through the branches that we refer to as brachiation. And it's sort of like the Tarzan swing that you think about. They're the only apes that do this because they have a very specialized shoulder. But it means that for a point in their, for a point in their in their swinging process, they actually let go with both hands and do this sort of like flying through the air motion. It's very graceful, very cool to watch. They're not very sexually dimorphic, so males and females are about the same size. And that's an important characteristic because the other thing we see in gibbons is that they live in what we call primary groups, meaning that there's one male and one female who are sort of teamed up for life, or at least for a long period of time. And this seems to be a trend in primate behavior or primate ecology, that when males and females are about the same size, they tend to have these more monogamous pair bonds. But when we see very large males and much smaller females, that's typically a sign of some sort of harem grouping, where there's one male and multiple females. And that has important implications for talking about humans and our evolution as well. Okay, our next group of primates, our next apes are the orangs, the orangutans here. The orangutans live today in Indonesia. They're extremely endangered because of deforestation, because of poaching. These guys lead very solitary lives today. And most primatologists of the past century have described orangutans as a solitary species, but it's very possible it's because of this deforestation and poaching that actually there just aren't enough orangutans to maintain larger social groups. So perhaps in the past, 6-10 million years ago when they first started evolving, orangutans maybe had more substantial social functions with each other, but today they tend to lead these very solitary lives. Orangutans are extremely sexually dimorphic. So we have these big alpha males that have all of the characteristics of being an alpha. Long hair, these big cheek flanges, big neck pouches. These guys are absolutely massive. And then we also have the females who are much more gracile, much more sort of streamlined. They almost look juvenile. So big differences between males and females. They are arboreal climbers, so they do live in trees, but they don't jump. They're too big for jumping. They don't swing. They sort of clamber around from one tree to the next. And we think that this group of apes probably first originated around 10 million years ago, 11 million years ago in East Asia. Now, if we turn to Africa, Africa is important for us because we know that's where our ancestors came from. We are missing a big chunk of data when it comes to understanding the evolution of, say the gorillas, okay? Because gorillas have always lived in forests, the best we can understand, and forests don't do a very good job of preserving fossils. And so out of the 10 million years that gorillas have been around, this is pretty much the extent of the fossil assemblage that we have for them. So we don't have a lot of evidence for the first appearance of gorillas in the fossil record, but we do think that they first evolved around 10 million years ago in Africa. So here we are situating the gorillas. This is now the group we refer to as the hominids, right? The African apes. Gorillas live in Central Africa. They're very endangered because of poaching and because of deforestation. Again, they're very sexually dimorphic with these big alpha males that are absolutely massive. They also tend to have this sort of lightened color on their backs, so that's how they get the name silverbacks. Because they're very sexually dimorphic, we also see that they tend to live in one male and multi-female groups. So this guy will have a number of females living in his territory, and he would have exclusive breeding access to all of those females. Gorillas are mostly terrestrial, so they mostly spend their life on the forest floor, but they do go up into the trees a little bit, particularly to sleep. They build nests at night, but these nests are only a couple of feet off the ground. They are classic knuckle walkers, so that same characteristic that we saw in Paralopithecus catalunicus 13 million years ago, we see persisting today in gorillas. Our next groups are the bonobos and the chimpanzees, our closest living relatives. Bonobos and chimps live in West and Central Africa. Chimps, the common chimpanzee, has a somewhat wider distribution, and bonobos are really restricted just to Central Africa. Bonobos and chimps, or I should say chimpanzees, are omnivorous. They eat fruit, they love fruit, they only eat leaves when they really have to, but they also love hunting. They love eating monkey, and specifically those colobus monkeys, these cercopithecoids, the old world monkeys that we were talking about just a second ago. Bonobos eat fruit. They're not hunters. They don't have that sort of aggressive aspect to their behavior. So hunting seems to be something restricted to chimps. Chimps and bonobos are not very sexually dimorphic, and bonobos even less so. So bonobo females are approximately 88% the size of bonobo males. And just to give you a comparison of what that would look like, it's pretty much the same in human populations. Human females are approximately 88% the size of human males within breeding populations. So a little sexual dimorphism, but not very much. Chimpanzees have been documented to use a variety of different types of tools in the wild, and we saw a video about that in class the other day. Bonobos, not so much tool users, but that could also have to do with the fact that there are relatively few of them. They live in smaller social groups, and so maybe that sort of impetus for innovation just hasn't happened within bonobo groups. There hasn't been a reason for it. Bonobos are also a very interesting group of primates because they have one very particular characteristic or behavior that we don't see anywhere else in the primate world except in humans. Bonobos are the only other primates besides humans who use sex for something other than reproduction. So in all other primate groups, sex is only to produce offspring. But bonobos use sex as a way of avoiding aggression. And so it's very common for two bonobos, let's say one of them has a piece of fruit, the other one wants the piece of fruit. If they were chimpanzees, this could be the beginning of a big fight. Things could get rough, things could get aggressive, someone could get bitten, there could be hard feelings. Chimpanzees tend to go towards the side of, I want what you have and things will go badly if you don't give it to me. Bonobos, however, are much more peaceful, maybe we could say. And so once there starts to be a little bit of tension, say around a piece of fruit that two individuals want, rather than fighting, what they'll do is simply have sex. Have sex quickly, and then, what happens to the fruit then? They probably don't care so much. But they use sex as a way to diffuse tension and avoid aggression. And this is a really fascinating behavior because it seems to be connected to the fact that bonobos live in these very small groups, and so they kind of can't afford to lose each other to intra-group aggression, right? They can't afford to risk each other's health by fighting with each other. But it's also very similar to what humans do. We use sex for lots of reasons outside of just simply reproduction. And so understanding where the sexuality of humans comes from, perhaps we can also start to understand it by looking at how bonobos use sex in similar contexts. All right, so here again are bonobos and chimps, and we have just one last little line here that we have yet to fill in on our cladogram of primates. And so here we are with Sahelanthropus chadensis, our potential last common ancestor. We'll be talking a little bit more about this fossil in the future, but this guy lived in Central Africa or Northern Africa. This fossil is from Chad, which is currently in the middle of the Sahara Desert. This guy lived between 7 and 6 million years ago and has characteristics that look like they might be ancestral to chimpanzees, but also might be ancestral to the hominids, to us, humans. And so that brings us then to the last group of primates on our cladogram, the humans. Today we have a pretty much worldwide distribution. We live just about everywhere except for Antarctica, but our origins lie in Africa. We are definitely still an African ape, no matter how much we've moved over the last several hundred or thousands of years. We are not very sexually dimorphic, especially when we compare ourselves to gorillas or orangutans. We're omnivorous, meaning that we eat all types of foods. We eat fruit, vegetables, meat, insects. We can pretty much eat anything because we have great teeth that are well adapted to that. We have a very unique behavioral adaptation that sets us apart from the rest of the primates, and that is culture. We have very, very, very large brains. We are also obligate bipeds. Okay, bipedalism means walking upright on two legs. which is something that only we do all the time. Chimpanzees and gorillas can walk upright on two legs, and a number of other primate species can walk upright on two legs, but we're the only species that has to. We can't go back to walking on all fours. And because we are two-legged walkers, we are also terrestrial. We can still see some evidence in our bodies for the fact that our ancestors lived in trees, but we are certainly committed to walking upright on the ground.